Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, whatever time of day you are watching this. Thank you for joining me, even though you didn't really have a choice. But I apologize. I am having to use my iPad because I actually sold my computer a few weeks ago, and so this is the only way I've been able to do school. And so Screenomatic does not work with iPad, so I am limited to just recording my screen for you, and I'm sure you're desperately disappointed, but I'm sure you will forgive me. My book report was over Passions of the Heart by John Street. Is a 260-page book that was a little bit longer than I expected, but it was still definitely very good. It was divided into three parts. The first part was the nature of the heart and its passions, and Street used this 100-page, roughly, segment of his book to illustrate how problems, especially sexual idolatry, really originates in the heart. The heart of the problem is the problem in the heart, especially with these types of sins. And he really did a great job at showing how our deep desires go back to our heart. And I don't want to touch on this too much because a lot of the things that he's discussed in these parts are what the rest of this presentation is about. Part 2 is the motivations of sexual idolatry. And again, something that I will discuss further, but to keep it simple, he pinpointed two motivations of the heart in regards to sexual idolatry: motivations of individuals who are hurting greatly or individuals who are hungering greatly. And again, that's something I'll touch on more later. Part 3, the last part of his book, was over the characteristics of a pure heart, after spending about the entire book about the condition of a heart and its progression towards strong sexual idolatry, and then motivations. He concluded his book with giving a great example of what a pure heart looks like in the conditions of that heart in relation to God and others. While this book was written for counselors primarily, he spent the majority of, pretty much the entire time, he spent over, sorry, I went blank for a second. He spent the majority of the time more over the technical analysis of the heart and how to give insight into what the counselee is lusting after and what they're trying to receive in a improper way, and really didn't address giving hope or gathering information or homework. So I only have a few things to mention here, but as far as giving hope goes, although it might seem odd, he offered hope in that the sexually immoral, sorry, that's a misspell, I think. The sexually immoral are a result of James 1:14-15, and not the environment or biology. I think it's easy for someone, especially in abuse cases or people exposed to sexual immorality at a younger age, that they would have wished to not be so. And while those factors definitely play into it, understanding how all sin is a result of our desires, and just like it talks about in James, each man is drawn away of his own lust and enticed, unless that conceived to bring forth sin, and sin when it's finished brings forth death. There's actually hope in here, because it's not like, oh, if your environment was differently or your biology was differently, then you'd be good and you wouldn't be struggling. It's that, no, this is really a problem at the heart. And if the problem's at the heart, then Jesus really is capable of giving us freedom. And that's why I included that in the giving hope section. Also, something we talk about often in counseling: all things, even sexual mistakes, can be used for good. And I think we often think about this when it comes to decision making, like, oh, if I do make this decision, God will use it for good when I'm trying to glorify him. But even our mistakes, God will use for good. And he made an interesting point in establishing that the deep trials of our life can really reveal to us the depth of our wicked hearts. And I thought this was really important because I have to agree with him that if it weren't for the dark times in our life when we are really, really confronted or being forced to be confronted with our wicked nature, we really wouldn't have a desire for God and his salvation, really the gospel. So a huge part of giving hope to people who are sexually enslaved, it would seem, even though I don't really like that term, but is having them understand that God and the gospel is so much greater than them. And he did conclude his book with, there is sufficient blessing in the biblical model of sexual intimacy, because I think it can come across for some reason that Christians are just against sexual intimacy, and it's something that's never talked about in churches or even not even talked about at home. And he made sure to make a point, well, it wasn't his main point, that God has sufficient, satisfactory blessing planned for those who choose to do sexual relations his way. Again, he did not do much for data gathering. It's just something he didn't really touch on. He spent the majority of time on other things. But something that I did think was relative, he pointed out a few times characteristics of people who are really just battling hard sexual sins. And I thought this was relevant because as counselors, I think we should be able to have insight into people's lives, and when they start presenting sets of behaviors, we should be ready to see certain heart issues. And so for the heart issue of sexual immorality, people are often characterized by a sudden lack of sexual drive with their spouse and just really being out of it, and just abnormally so. Also a desire for an unusual amount of privacy, whether that's private bank accounts or credit cards, unable to account for significant time slots in their day. Really, they just did not give account. They were just gone at weird hours of the time. It's like, hey, where are you? Oh, I was just out. Really not being able to give a pinpoint answer to things. Also, people struggling with sexual sins often are very controlling and have serious feelings of entitlement. As I'll point off later, sexual immorality is really a really self-focused, selfish sin. And he really did spend a lot of time talking about the hurting and the hungering heart. That's something I mentioned in the beginning about part 2 of the book. And he thought it was important to distinguish the two types of sexually immoral: those who are hurting and they're more downtrodden and more depressed, you might say, and they're looking for an outlet to kind of give them what they think they deserve. They don't deserve to be unhappy, and they are hurting and looking for some sort of answer to their hurt. And then there's the hungering, those who are just more passionate about, I really want more entertainment, more enjoyment, more fulfillment. And Street thought it was important to divide either the hurting and the hungering to help us understand what they're pursuing after. Because when we can understand what they're wanting, what they're desiring, we can really get at the deeper part of idolatry when it comes to this. Something I didn't really actually understand until this book was that I think a lot of times when we're talking about sexual immorality, it's like, oh, yeah. Like, your problem is you just, want sex outside of what God wants you to have it. So, just fix that. And it goes deeper than that, because it's not just that the people want sex or sexual intimacy. It's that they're looking for an answer in sexual intimacy that's not there. And I'll get into that with our related issues, and I kind of already did. I probably should have switched the slide earlier, because that's something that he touched on a lot with the related issues, in that hurting and the hurting are often angry, and they show signs of self-pity, discontentment, fear, because they're just focused on what they don't have and wanting more. And the hungering is similar in that they're often controlling, looking for more reward, drawn to flattery and comfort, and just a little bit more like illicit and promiscuous. Something that is very important to talk about is forgiveness, because sexual sins are often committed against other people, other spouses, or family members in terrible cases. And that's something that really needs to be taken time with, because restitution and progress can't be made until forgiveness has been taken care of. One more thing on the related issues is, I think this is the most important, that really what is behind a lot of sexual sins is just extreme selfishness. I thought Sri did a great job with this quote. He said, "You do not see yourself as an undeserving," well, sorry, I should add context, sexually enslaved, you might say, person. He addresses them here, and he says, "The problem is you do not see yourself as an undeserving, corrupt sinner that already possesses more than it deserves. Instead, you exalt yourself in thinking, convinced that you can keep the demanding desires of sex under control." And problem with sexual sins, or people struggling with this, is they really don't see themselves as worthless and deserving of nothing. They just don't have a proper view of themselves and a proper view of God. That plays into our key biblical principles a little bit, and I'll get on to that. But something that is also worth mentioning, personal effort is required. I think people can just kind of be like, well, like, I'm praying to God and like he's not helping me and I just don't understand. Personal effort is definitely required, and it's something that needs to be stressed in the counseling process. Also, this is a big one. Behavioral change is worthless without heart change. Colossians 3:5 is the reference John Street used, because I think we can often get distracted when trying to counsel this individual struggling with some sort of sexual sin, that just like trying to get them to stop the behavior and not addressing again what is behind this, what they're really trying to get. And someone can be pure in one sense, but still be just as selfish and just as lost and far from God. So it's really important to get back to the heart and not just putting off the behaviors. And that goes on to how in all areas of someone who's struggling with sexual immorality, they need to put off, but they need to put on. For the married, that looks like in these passages, 1 Corinthians 6 and 7 might be more familiar, Ephesians 4, Proverbs 5. All these passages are pointing to sexual relations being about serving the other person. And for the singles, in Ephesians 5, 3 through 5, it gives the understanding that we can't focus on the things we don't have, because that's, once again, selfishness, thinking, oh, I deserve more, God, like, why didn't you give me this? But we have to come to grips with the things we have through Christ. Unfortunately, homework, he didn't have hardly anything. He did reference vaguely a journal of upsets. And this, again, is just really helpful, because remember, the problem isn't the behavior per se. It's not just, stop the behavior. We need to stop the behavior. It's what are they trying to get by their behaviors? And so journal of upsets really helps people be able to track what were you thinking and desiring right before you gave into temptation or met with this person. And it really gives the counselor good information to work with to find the heart of the problem. Something that I think could be relevant, and he did use a few times. He had many biblical examples of sexually immoral people. One of them is David. He talks about how with the sin with Bathsheba, and how he potentially was looking for comfort by staying back from battle. And I think it was something to look at, and I just didn't really have too much to include, so I wanted to include that. But most important is definitely Journal of Upsets. First off, definitely a terrible book. No, I'm just kidding. I just thought I put it in there because I don't. It's just kind of be funny to see someone actually say their book was terrible. But no, it was definitely not terrible. It was great resource. But I want to emphasize that I really think it's for the biblical counselor, not the counselee. His book was filled with a lot of examples of inappropriate relationships or unfortunate situations, and it wasn't overly descriptive, but it had a lot of sexual wording and more intense language that I think if we were to give to a counselee, it wouldn't be helpful. They would really just be more susceptible to temptation with something they're already struggling with. And once again, it's he's very technical and has a lot of great information, but it would be kind of a little bit more depressing if a counselee were to go through this for like homework. So I'd really recommend this for the counselor, not for a counselee. So yeah, incredibly insightful to the problem of the heart, really gets behind it, past the behaviors. But as far as like homework and data gathering ideas, it requires a more intuitive analysis. And by that mean that kind of just understanding what he's getting at and then seeing that into scripture and developing your own homework and data gathering. But that's all I have. Hopefully I'll be able to get this all figured out and submitted for you. And once again, I'm sorry that I was not unable to work with Screenomatic. But I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.